the mountain did not merely endure the storm. It seemed to be under siege. Wind screamed across the frozen slopes with a ferocity that felt alive, clawing at the isolated cabin as if determined to tear it from its foundations. Snow hurled itself sideways, blinding and relentless, piling against the walls and swallowing every trace of the narrow road that led there. The blizzard roared like a furious beast, its voice rising and falling, rattling the windows and pressing down on the roof with crushing weight. Inside the chaos, the cabin stood as a lone, stubborn defiance against nature's violence. Then came the knocking, heavy, desperate, and startlingly human amid the storm's inhuman fury. Once, the sound cracked against the thick wooden door. Twice, it echoed, sharper now, urgent. Thrice, it thundered, carrying with it a sense of finality, as though whoever stood outside had already exhausted their strength. The door groaned as it was pulled open, old hinges protesting, and the storm immediately seized its chance. Wind and snow exploded into the room, a deafening rush of icy air that extinguished warmth and flooded the cabin with cold, chaotic breath. If you're a delivery driver, drop the package and get lost. If you're a lost hiker, there's a ranger station 2 miles south. Do not bother me. The man standing just inside the threshold was a wall unto himself, broad-shouldered and unmoving, carved from shadow and impatience. His voice cut through the storm with a gravelly authority, deep and worn, as if disuse had only sharpened its edges. He did not step forward or offer shelter. He simply stood there, framed by firelight and darkness, clearly expecting the world and the person in it to obey his command and disappear. "Mr. Vane, I am Nora. The publisher sent me the stenographer." She stood half buried in drifting snow, her coat soaked through, curls plastered to her pale face. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, each word forced past lips, numbed by cold. The storm tugged at her like a living thing, trying to pull her backward into its white void. Fear and exhaustion weighed heavily in her eyes, yet she held her ground, clinging to the fragile thread of hope that the name she spoke would grant her entry and survival. "The publisher? I told that old vampire I do not need an assistant, and I do not write anymore. Go back." For a moment, silence stretched between them, an uneasy pause filled only by the howl of the wind pouring through the open door. Silas did not move aside. His expression hardened, lines etched deep by years of solitude and resentment. The past clung to him like a bitter aftertaste, and the mention of the publisher stirred irritation rather than obligation. To him, the storm outside was an inconvenience, and the person before him an intrusion. "The car that dropped me off is gone. The blizzard has blocked the roads. The driver said they will not be cleared until next week. Sir, if you do not let me in, I will freeze to death on your doorstep." That would be headline news. Her breath came fast and shallow, each inhale burning her lungs like shards of ice. Panic seeped into her voice, despite her attempt at reason. She imagined the cold creeping further into her bones and the headlines she spoke of, not as irony, but as inevitability. The mountain did not forgive weakness, and she knew she was running out of time, measured not in hours, but in heartbeats. A low, irritated growl rumbled from Silas. In a sudden, forceful motion, he reached out and seized her arm. The world lurched as she was yanked across the threshold, boots scraping uselessly against the floor. The door slammed shut behind them with a final, decisive boom. Instantly, the storm was cut off, reduced to a distant, muffled rage. In its place rose the steady crackle of a fireplace, warmth radiating outward like a reluctant mercy. "For God's sake. You look like a rat dragged out of a frozen river. Is this what graduates look like nowadays? Can you not even afford a decent coat?" He looked down at her with open disdain, firelight casting sharp shadows across his severe features. Melted snow pooled at her feet, and her clothes clung to her frame, heavy and dark with moisture. She must have looked pitiful, small, soaked, and shaking violently. Silas's words were harsh, but beneath them was a grudging assessment that she was alive, barely, and now unmistakably his problem. "I have student loans. Thank you for letting me in." The attempt at humor was weak but genuine. Gratitude flickered through her fear as she wrapped her arms around herself, shoulders hunched, trying unsuccessfully to stop the shivering. The warmth of the fire felt distant and unreachable, as if her body had forgotten how to accept it. Still, she stood there, stubbornly polite, clinging to civility as a shield against humiliation. "Do not thank me yet. There is no room service here. If you do not work, I will throw you out to feed the wolves. Now, take off those wet clothes." He scoffed, turning slightly away as he spoke, already dismissing her gratitude as premature. His tone made it clear that shelter came with conditions and mercy was temporary. The cabin, though warm, felt suddenly dangerous in a different way, ruled by a man whose patience was thinner than the ice outside. His command landed heavily in the air, abrupt and unsettling. What? Terror flashed across her face. Her mind raced, exhaustion colliding with alarm. She stood frozen, not from cold alone now, but from uncertainty, unsure how to interpret his words and unsure where safety truly lay. The crackling fire seemed to grow louder, each pop and hiss punctuating her fear. "Do not look at me like that. I have no interest in an underdeveloped body like yours. Go to the fireplace and dry off. If you do not get your body temperature up, you cannot work for me." I hate the sound of teeth chattering when I am trying to think. With his back turned, Silas poured himself a drink, the liquid glinting darkly in the firelight. His dismissal was blunt and almost cruel, yet laced with a twisted practicality. To him, this was not kindness, but efficiency. As he drank, the fire continued its steady burn, waiting patiently for Nora to step closer, to choose warmth over fear, and to cross the invisible line between intruder and reluctant guest. The room was dominated by sound before it was defined by sight. The old typewriter sat like a stubborn relic on the desk, its keys striking paper with a sharp, metallic insistence. Each impact echoed as if the walls themselves were being typed into submission, carrying impatience, judgment, and a strange hunger. The air felt tense and overworked, thick with the residue of too many unfinished thoughts. Silas's footsteps carved a second rhythm into the space. Heavy and deliberate, they wore invisible grooves into the wooden floor as he paced like a caged animal. The room seemed to shrink with each pass, offering no corner where Nora could escape his presence. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows until it dissolved into a constant, colorless hush. It became a living white noise that erased the boundary between the house and the world beyond, wrapping the room in isolation and suspending time. 3 days passed, blurring together until Nora could barely tell where one ended and the next began. She had arrived believing she would assist a great writer, but instead discovered her role was to absorb Silas's dissatisfaction, rage, and doubt. He was not writing during those days. He was grinding her down, using her as a surface for his failures. Stop. Delete it. That sentence is trash. The moonlight spilled on her face. Cliché, garbage. Is this what universities teach you to write? Silas halted so abruptly that the silence felt violent. His body coiled with disdain as contempt filled the room, curling around the desk, the chair, and the typewriter, until it felt inescapable. "But that is what you just dictated, sir." Nora's voice slipped out softly, almost apologetically. She did not lift her eyes, and the admission trembled between them, fragile and dangerous. "That was a test of your taste. If you accept garbage sentences like that without question, you do not deserve to sit in front of my typewriter. You need to learn to push back, Nora. Literature is war, not a tea party. He moved toward her, closing the distance with calculated menace. His hands came down hard on the desk, rattling the typewriter as his presence loomed heavy and suffocating. The lesson was about dominance as much as writing. Then how should it be written? The moonlight, like a cold knife, sliced open her disguise. Courage gathered in Nora, piece by fragile piece, until it was just enough to support her words. The sentence emerged clean and sharp, carrying imagery that could not be ignored. The room fell into an unnatural stillness. Silence swallowed even the hum of the wind, forcing every breath to announce itself as time waited on the edge of Silas's reaction. The quiet broke as liquid poured into a glass. Silas turned away, the ritual of the bottle marking a pause and a refusal to respond too quickly. It is passable. Type it. His voice returned lower and stripped of its sharpest edges. The approval was grudging, yet in that single word, there was a fleeting crack in his armor. Mr. Vane, you actually want to write, do you not? You are just afraid. Her fingers resumed their motion on the keys, the steady rhythm giving her something solid to cling to. The question slipped out, threaded with insight she knew she should not voice. In this house, only I have the right to ask questions. You can go to sleep now, throw away that ragged sweater you are wearing. The cashmere sweater I put by your bed is for you to wear. Ice shifted against glass as he lifted his drink. He did not look at her as he spoke, his words exerting control over her body and choices with casual authority. That is brand new. It looks expensive. She hesitated, the protest small but sincere. The sweater represented a line she was unsure she was meant to cross. I dislike my employees dressing like beggars. It offends my aesthetic. Put it on. That is an order. Impatience sharpened his tone as the order landed with finality. The rhythm of the house reasserted itself, steady and unyielding. The private library breathed with a quiet, almost reverent stillness, its two-story ceiling arching high above like the inside of a cathedral, devoted not to prayer, but to knowledge. A tall wooden ladder rested against one of the towering shelves, its wheels gliding softly along a metal track as it was moved from section to section. The wood creaked faintly with age and use, each sound amplified by the hushed space. Below, the soft whisper of pages turning marked the passage of time, the rhythm slow and deliberate, as though the room itself were reading along. At the very top of the ladder, Nora balanced carefully, one hand gripping the rail, while the other sorted through spines worn smooth by decades of touch. From that height, the library seemed even more immense, shelves stretching endlessly in both directions. Far below her, Silas sat in a deep leather chair, his broad frame at ease, a book open in his hands. The lamplight cast warm shadows across his shoulders, and he appeared completely absorbed, unaware of the fragile equilibrium above him. As Nora reached just a fraction farther than before, the delicate balance betrayed her. A single book slipped free from the shelf, its weight tipping forward. It fell with a sharp flutter, pages fanning the air as it dropped. The ladder responded instantly, shuddering beneath her feet. The once stable rails began to sway, the motion subtle at first, then violently unmistakable. Nora's breath caught in her throat as the world tilted, the shelf pulling away from her grasp. Her gasp tore through the silence as her footing vanished. The ladder rocked hard on its track, wood groaning in protest. Gravity claimed her without mercy, dragging her down in a rush of air and panic. The fall lasted only a heartbeat, yet it stretched endlessly in her mind. Every sensation sharpened, the cold rush along her skin, the helplessness, the certainty that the floor was about to rise and meet her with brutal force. But the expected impact never came. Instead of the unforgiving ground, she collided with something solid, warm, and unyielding. The sound was a heavy thud, deep and resonant, not the crack of bone on stone, but the muffled shock of a body absorbing another's weight. Strong arms closed around her in the same instant, locking her in place before she could even think to scream. She did not hit the ground. Silas had moved with startling speed, the book forgotten, the chair abandoned. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say that she fell directly into him, into the arms of a man built like a bear. His chest was broad and immovable, his grip immediate and certain. The strength in his arms was not hurried or frantic. It was controlled, absolute, like iron clamps snapping shut to prevent disaster. Do you not have a brain? The ladder wobbles. Why did you not call for help? His breath brushed her ear as he spoke, warm and sharp with restrained anger. He had not put her down. If anything, his hold tightened, one arm firm across her back, the other bracing her weight with ease. Nora could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her, the powerful heartbeat that contrasted violently with the frantic pounding of her own. I did not want to disturb you. You were reading. The words tumbled out unevenly, carried on a breath that still had not fully returned to her lungs. Her hands remained fisted in his shirt, fingers curled unconsciously as if letting go might send her falling all over again. Embarrassment crept in alongside the shock, a warm flush spreading across her cheeks as she became acutely aware of how close they were, how completely she was supported by him. In this house, your safety takes priority over my books. Do you understand? He did not loosen his hold as he spoke. If anything, his arms drew her closer, as though emphasizing the point through action rather than words. The library around them seemed to recede, shelves and shadows blurring into insignificance. There was only the firmness of his grip, the undeniable certainty that he would not let her fall, not now, not ever. Understood. You can put me down now. Her voice was softer this time, tinged with reluctant awareness. The heat in her face deepened, betraying her composure. She shifted slightly in his arms, suddenly conscious of her weight and of how effortlessly he continued to hold her suspended above the ground. You are light, light as a sheet of paper. You need to eat meat. Tonight, I am cooking steak. If you leave a single bite, I will feed it to you myself. A low chuckle rumbled from his chest as he spoke, the sound vibrating through her where she was pressed against him. It was not mocking, but deeply assured, as though the decision had already been made and required no further discussion. Only then did his grip finally begin to ease, though the presence of his strength lingered unmistakably in the quiet air of the library. The failure came not as a clean break, but as a dying animal's last breath. Electricity fizzled through the walls, a frantic, stuttering whisper that hinted at resistance before surrender. One by one, the house's modern conveniences fell silent, leaving behind a vacuum that felt heavier than noise. The sudden absence magnified everything else. The old timber creaking, the distant groan of the structure settling, and the way darkness pooled in corners like something alive and waiting. With the machines dead, the storm outside asserted its dominance. Rain lashed against the windows with renewed ferocity, wind clawing at the eaves as if demanding entry. Thunder rolled low and slow, not a sharp crack, but a prolonged growl that vibrated through the floorboards. The house, stripped of its artificial hum, seemed to listen, holding its breath as nature reminded them how small and exposed they truly were. A match was struck in the dark, its flare abrupt and intimate. The sulfur hissed softly, and a brief, trembling light bloomed between Silas's fingers. Fire revealed fragments of the room in warm, unreliable flashes, the curve of a chair, the edge of a bookshelf, dust dancing like pale insects. Shadows leapt and retreated with every movement, making the space feel ancient and ritualistic, as though this was how stories had always begun. The generator is busted. Looks like we're going back to the 19th century tonight. Come here, sit on the rug, closer to the fireplace. His voice carried authority softened by weariness, a man accustomed to command but no longer certain of outcomes. He gestured toward the hearth, where embers glowed faintly, promising warmth but also exposure. The rug before it was worn thin by years of pacing and contemplation, fibers flattened by countless nights spent thinking too much and sleeping too little. Mr. Vane, her hesitation lingered in the air, delicate but unmistakable. The title felt suddenly too formal, a relic from a brighter world with lights and distance. In the dark, with the storm pressing close and the fire breathing softly, words carried more weight, and names threatened to become confessions. Call me Silas. We do not need titles in the dark. The darkness seemed to approve, folding around them with conspiratorial intimacy. Without light, hierarchy dissolved. There was only proximity, shared breath, and the quiet acknowledgement that whatever happened next would be unguarded by convention. Silas, why did you stop writing? Your books saved me once. When my parents died, your words were the only thing that kept me company. As she spoke, memories threaded through her voice, long nights, borrowed paperbacks, sentences that felt like hands reaching out through grief. The firelight caught in her eyes, reflecting not just flame, but a younger self curled around stories for survival. To admit this aloud was to place something fragile between them. Silas did not answer immediately. The pause stretched, filled only by the subtle sound of liquid being swallowed as a bottle tilted with practiced resignation. Whiskey burned its way down his throat, a familiar punishment he accepted willingly, as if pain might balance some unseen scale. Words cannot save people, Nora. Words are lies. I wrote so many stories about love and redemption, but I could not even save my own wife. She committed suicide right here in this house because I was too focused on writing and ignored her depression. I am an executioner. Each sentence landed like a verdict. The house itself seemed to recoil, walls absorbing the confession and floorboards remembering. In the firelight, his face was carved by shadow, eyes hollowed by guilt that had fermented over years. The word executioner hung between them, heavy and irrevocable, as though he had finally named the monster he believed himself to be. No, that was an illness. It was not your fault, and you are still writing. The fragments you dictated these past few days, you called them practice. But I know. That is the beginning of a new book. Your soul is not dead yet. She shifted closer, the movement small but deliberate. Fabric whispered against fabric, a soft negotiation of space. Her proximity brought warmth that had nothing to do with the fire, a human defiance against his self-imposed exile. Her words were offered steady and insistent, like a hand extended across a chasm. Silas turned his head toward her, the motion slow, as if he feared what he might see. Firelight traced the sharp lines of his face, illuminating eyes that had known acclaim and ruin in equal measure. In that flickering glow, she was no longer an abstraction or a voice. She was undeniably real. You are too naive. Do you think you can heal me? Who are you? Just a little stenographer? The challenge was edged with fear. Years of isolation had taught him to wound first, to push away before attachment could take root. Yet beneath the harshness trembled something dangerously close to hope, and that frightened him more than despair ever had. I am your reader, and right now I am the only person here with you. The truth of it settled heavily. The storm, the darkness, and the dead machines conspired to strip the world down to this single moment. Reader and writer were no longer separated by paper and time, but shared the same fragile air. Fabric rustled again as she reached out and her hand found his, large and rough, scarred by years of living and surviving. The contact was tentative at first, then steady, her fingers resting against his palm as though testing whether he would vanish if held. Silas inhaled sharply. His throat tightened and his voice emerged hoarse, scraped raw by restraint. He did not pull away, but every muscle braced, a man standing at the edge of something he both desired and feared. "Take your hand away, Nora. I am not some kind, fatherly figure. I am a man who has been starving for a long time. You are playing with fire." The warning was sincere, almost pleading. Firelight danced across their joined hands, transforming skin into bronze and shadow. Hunger radiated from him, not just of the body, but of recognition and of being seen without judgment. "I am not afraid of fire. I have been cold for too long." The room answered first with a small, intimate sound as a book was opened, its spine stretching as if waking from a long sleep. Pages whispered against one another, releasing a faint papery breath that mingled with the warmth of the space. Somewhere behind them, either fragile classical music or the steady murmur of a fire settled into the background, thickening the air. The sound wrapped the room in a deliberate hush, as though the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. To kill time and, perhaps to disguise the way the temperature had begun to rise from proximity, Silas chose to read aloud. His decision was deliberate. He did not reach for comfort or fantasy, but for Baudelaire, words heavy with decay and beauty, and longing sharpened into something almost cruel. The choice itself was a confession that he intended not to soothe, but to expose, letting language press where silence had already begun to ache. "Tell me, does your heart sometimes fly away, Agatha, far from the black ocean of the filthy city?" His voice emerged slowly, deep and resonant, drawn out like a cello, bowing a single aching note. Each syllable seemed to vibrate through the floorboards before reaching her. As he read, his body shifted imperceptibly closer until the space between them thinned with intention. The words became a bridge stretching from his mouth directly to her pulse. "Tell me, Nora, has your heart flown away? Or is it trapped on this snowy mountain?" The question hovered between them, no longer literary or safe. His nearness altered the room's geometry as the mountain he spoke of felt real, pressing in from the windows and the cold in the walls. His gaze searched her face with dangerous patience, prepared to wait for an answer that might undo them both, while the fire cracked softly in reminder of heat alongside snow. "It is trapped by a grumpy old writer." She did not look away as she answered. Her eyes held him with an intensity that refused irony and stripped humor down to its naked truth. In that look were confinement and choice entwined, an admission that whatever cage existed, she had entered it willingly. The air tightened as if the room itself recognized the danger in her honesty. That look. "Do not look at me with those eyes as if you are looking at a hero. I am covered in scars. I am not only old, I am bad." He snapped the book shut with a sharp, final sound. The motion was abrupt, almost violent, as though he needed to sever the spell before it deepened. When he spoke, it was not to perform, but to warn, his words heavy with history and mistakes etched into skin and memory. The confession was rough and defensive, built on the belief that truth delivered harshly could still protect them. "Then why did you give me your sweater? Why did you cook for me? Why are you afraid to touch me now?" Her questions landed one by one, each gentler than the last, and far more precise. They dismantled his argument without raising their voice, tracing small kindnesses that contradicted the darkness he claimed. The pause before her final question stretched thin with implication, holding every almost touch and every withheld gesture where fear had disguised itself as restraint. "Who said I was afraid?" The words left him low and rough, vibrating with something unrestrained. In the same breath, stillness shattered into motion as he closed the distance, and momentum carried them down onto the thick shag rug. The fibers caught against their skin as if trying to hold them there. And breath came fast and uneven, filling the space with undeniable proof of what had waited beneath the surface all along. The moment continued without mercy, breath colliding with breath in the narrow space between the churro. Wow. Damascus. The tree out and ni, som gansel den madschen thick, and lean in the bomb that drishenu odd shinked sa breath aloning with them. Our inhale was loud and unsteady, scraped raw by want, while each exhale trembled like a confession released too late. Fingers moved over skin with hesitant certainty, the rough drag of calloused pads against living warmth sending a shiver through the silence. Behind them, the hearth refused to be ignored. The fire cracked and popped, spitting sparks like impatient punctuation, reminding the room that heat could be both comfort and threat. "You are shivering, Nora. Is it from the cold or from fear?" As he spoke, Silas's hand traced the delicate architecture of her collarbone, not with haste, but with the solemn focus of a man deciphering something sacred. His fingers moved as though they were reading a hidden language embossed beneath her skin, pausing, retreating, then advancing again. Nora's body answered before her mind could intervene. The faint tremor that passed through her was instinctive, a response etched deeper than reason. The room seemed to narrow around that single line of touch, as if the world had been reduced to skin, breath, and the quiet authority of his voice. "It is from anticipation." The word hung between them, fragile and luminous. Anticipation was not merely an emotion now, it was a living thing, coiled tight in her chest, fluttering against her ribs with restless wings. Nora felt exposed by her own honesty, yet steadied by it as well. Her trembling was no longer just a reaction to his proximity, but a declaration of surrender to the moment unfolding. In the dim firelight, her breath caught again, as though her body had already decided to step forward while her thoughts lagged behind. Honest little thing. Do you know, a writer's hands are usually dirty, stained with ink and smelling of smoke. "Aren't you afraid I will make you dirty?" A low chuckle escaped him, intimate and unguarded, vibrating through the space between them. It carried the weight of nights spent alone, hunched over pages, fingers blackened by ink and ash. When he spoke of dirt, it was not shame he offered, but history, the residue of creation, of obsession, of solitude. His hands hovered near her, as if giving her one last chance to retreat, the faint scent of smoke and paper clinging to him like a second skin. The question was not meant to frighten her. It was an invitation. "I want you to leave a mark. Silas, do not treat me like the stenographer who just fetches your tea. I am yours." Her reply landed with deliberate force, each sentence stripping away another layer of distance between them. Nora lifted her chin, not in defiance, but in offering, refusing the smallness he had named. To be marked, to be claimed in ink and memory, felt less like erasure and more like recognition. The firelight caught in her eyes, revealing a resolve that surprised even her. In that instant, she was no longer a peripheral presence in his life, but a declaration written aloud. "You are mine. You are the sentence I got stuck on halfway through. You are the only poem I want to read in the middle of the night." His voice shifted, shedding its teasing edge and settling into something solemn, almost reverent. The words were not spoken lightly. They carried the weight of years abandoned, of drafts discarded and silences endured. To call her a sentence was to admit obsession, to confess that she had disrupted the careful architecture of his solitude. In the hush that followed, the world seemed to tilt, aligning itself around that admission as though it were a truth long overdue. When their lips met, it was not chaos, but gravity that pulled them together. The kiss unfolded slowly and deliberately, a deep and consuming pressure that erased the distance between thought and sensation. breath mingled, unhurried yet overwhelming, as if time itself had softened to accommodate them. Around them, fabric whispered in protest as clothes shifted and folded, yielding inch by inch. The rug beneath them bore witness, its fibers pressed flat by the careful weight of two lives converging. I am going to write you into my body, every punctuation mark, every paragraph. No typewriter tonight, Nora. You are my paper. The whisper against her ear was both promise and vow, each word sinking beneath her skin with deliberate precision. Language, his oldest refuge, had abandoned the page and found a living surface instead. Outside, the blizzard raged without restraint, snow and wind conspiring to smother every sound and every sign of the world beyond the walls. Inside, on the rug warmed by fire and confession, a man who had lived in exile from tenderness for 5 long years finally surrendered. In Nora's arms, he found sanctuary. And in her presence, he read not to escape life, but to return to it. Early morning crept into the mountain cabin not gently, but with a blunt, industrial insistence. Somewhere beyond the frost-blurred windows, snow plows groaned and roared, their heavy blades scraping packed ice from the road like metal teeth against bone. The sound traveled through the valley, low and relentless, announcing that the world outside had resumed its schedule. Above that mechanical rhythm, birds dared to sing, their thin, optimistic chirps cutting through the cold air, while pale sunlight struck the glass panes and fractured into sharp reflections across the wooden walls. Inside the cabin, the final intimacy of the blizzard was already dissolving. The quiet interior was punctured by a smaller, more intimate sound, the harsh rasp of a zipper being pulled closed. Silas stood near the foot of the bed, his movements efficient, almost military. Fabric folded, then compressed, memories reduced to compartments. Each tug of the zipper felt final, as if sealing not just a bag, but an entire version of the past few days. He did not look back, and the distance between his rigid shoulders and the bed felt wider than the snowfields outside. "Silas, what is that noise?" Nora's voice emerged thick with sleep, tangled in the remnants of warmth and confusion. Her eyes fluttered open reluctantly, adjusting to the invasive brightness of morning. The bed still carried the shape of the night before, sheets twisted and heavy with shared heat. For a brief, fragile second, she existed between dream and waking, before the sounds anchored her to reality. Something was wrong. Her body sensed it before her mind fully caught up. "The road is clear. The rescue team and the publisher's car will be here in about an hour. I packed your bags for you." He spoke without turning around, his voice stripped of softness, polished into something hard and utilitarian. Sunglasses already covered his eyes despite the early hour, a deliberate barrier against both light and scrutiny. His words landed like measured blows, each sentence closing a door. The casual finality of it clashed violently with the vulnerability of the night before, creating a dissonance that made the air feel thinner. "What do you mean? You are kicking me out? After last night, you are kicking me out?" Nora jolted upright, the fog of sleep burned away by shock. The sheets slipped as she moved, but she barely noticed, her focus locked entirely on him. Last night replayed behind her eyes in fragmented flashes of shared warmth and whispered confessions. Her heart raced as she searched his back for any sign that this was a misunderstanding or a cruel joke. She found none. Last night was a side effect of the blizzard. Like cabin fever, people hallucinate. Now the sun is out. You should go back to the civilized world, Nora. You have student loans to pay, a career to fight for. Here, there is only snow and an old dog. Silas finally turned to face her, the sunglasses reflecting her image back at her in miniature, distorted and unreachable. His jaw was tight, every muscle in his face disciplined into control. By naming the night a hallucination, he attempted to erase it, to reduce something raw and real into a meteorological anomaly. The mention of her obligations sounded rehearsed, as if he were reading from a script prepared to protect them both, especially himself. "You are not an old dog. You are a stubborn mule. You clearly fell in love with me. What are you afraid of? Afraid I will leave like your ex-wife? I am not her. I am stronger than you think." She rose from the bed, the sheet gathered around her like improvised armor. Anger fueled her movements, giving her spine a fierce, defiant straightness. Words poured out, sharp and desperate, striking at the places she knew were tender. She refused to accept the narrative he offered and refused to be dismissed as a passing storm. Her strength was alive in her trembling hands and in her refusal to back away. "It is precisely because you are strong that you should not rot here. I do not want you to become my nurse or my accessory. Go, Nora, while I can still let you go. This is your payment. Enough to pay off your loans and buy a decent apartment. Get back to the city." His voice surged into a shout and echoed off the cabin walls. With a sharp, almost violent motion, he hurled a thick envelope onto the bed. It landed dully, heavy with paper and intention. Money was transformed into a weapon of distance. His hands clenched at his sides, as if resisting the urge to do anything else. This was him choosing loss over risk. Nora stepped forward and picked up the envelope, her fingers shaking despite her effort to appear composed. The paper felt rough and impersonal against her skin. She did not cry, and no tears came to soften the moment. Instead, she stared at him with an intensity that felt like a final imprint, as if she were memorizing the exact shape of his refusal. Silence stretched between them, dense and irreversible. "Fine, Silas Vane. Remember that you pushed me away. Do not regret it." The engine coughed, then roared to life, its vibration traveling through the metal frame of the car and into the seat beneath Nora. Outside, winter pressed close from every direction. Snow lay piled along the road like a silent audience, swallowing sound and color alike. The tires rolled forward, crunching and slipping, each uneven bump reminding her how far she was being carried away from the house she had just left behind. In the back seat, isolated from the driver by both space and silence, Nora felt suspended between where she had been and somewhere she did not yet understand. As the car settled into motion, Nora lifted the envelope from her lap. The paper rasped softly under her fingers, an ordinary sound that felt unnaturally loud in the closed cabin. She slid a finger beneath the seal and opened it, the motion careful, almost reverent. A check rested neatly on top, impersonal and cold, followed by a thick stack of typed pages. The familiar weight of them told her exactly what they were. The words Silas had dictated, the sentences she had shaped line by line over the past few days, her labor transformed into something that no longer fully belonged to her. She flipped through the pages as the car lurched along the snowy road, the rhythm of travel syncing with the soft flutter of paper. Paragraph after paragraph bore the clean uniformity of type, the disciplined voice she recognized all too well. Then, near the end, the texture changed. The last few pages were different, uneven and personal. Ink curved across the paper in unmistakable handwriting. Silas had written these lines himself, sometime during the night, while she had been asleep and defenseless against the quiet decisions he was making. "On this frozen wasteland, I did not expect spring, until a lost bird crashed into my door. She wore a ragged sweater, but carried the most expensive fire." The words trembled in her mind as she read them, each sentence striking deeper than the last. The image of cold and desolation wrapped around her thoughts, and with it came the unsettling realization that she was standing inside someone else's metaphor. The car seemed to fade as she read, replaced by the emotional landscape of the page, where isolation was not just weather, but a state of the soul, and warmth arrived unexpectedly and violently through her. I thought I was saving her, but actually, she was absolving me. Her breath caught. That single line rewrote the past few weeks in her head, turning every shared moment on its axis. Saving and being saved blurred together until she could no longer tell where his need ended and hers began. The intimacy of the confession felt almost unbearable, as if she'd been allowed into a room she was never meant to see, where Silas had named his guilt and laid it at her feet without asking permission. Book title, Nora. Her name stared back at her from the page, stripped of context and transformed into a declaration. It was no longer just a name. It was a claim. A pulse of heat surged through her chest, colliding with disbelief, anger, and a fragile sense of recognition. He had written her into permanence, binding her identity to his story, erasing the line between author and subject, between collaborator and creation. The car suddenly screamed in protest as the brakes slammed down. Rubber shrieked against ice, the sound sharp and violent, slicing through Nora's spiraling thoughts. Her body lurched forward, heart leaping into her throat as the world outside blurred into white chaos. The moment stretched, suspended between motion and disaster, before the car skidded to a shuddering halt. Stop. Stop the car. I need to go back. Her voice tore out of her, raw and unfiltered, filling the car with urgency. She leaned forward, gripping the seat, every instinct screaming that distance itself was becoming a threat. Going forward felt wrong and irreversible, like letting something precious slip beyond reach.
"Miss, the road is slippery and Mr. Vane said—"
The driver's response was cautious and measured, shaped by responsibility and orders rather than emotion. His hands remained tight on the steering wheel, eyes flicking toward the road as if the icy stretch ahead could justify everything that was happening. I do not care what he said. That is a book I wrote half of. That is my name. If you do not stop, I will jump out. The words burst from her with reckless force. This was no longer about comfort or safety. It was about ownership, about being seen and claimed without consent. Her name echoed in the small space, heavy with defiance. The cold road outside no longer frightened her. What terrified her was continuing forward, leaving behind a story that had already decided who she was without letting her choose. The villa felt cavernous in its stillness, a space once designed for conversation, now reduced to a mausoleum of abandoned thoughts. Silas sat alone at the heavy desk, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the walls themselves pressed inward. Dust floated lazily through the late afternoon light, each particle visible and suspended, mocking the passage of time. The quiet was not peaceful. It was accusatory. It wrapped around him like a shroud, forcing him to confront every unfinished sentence and every choice he had postponed until courage finally ran out. His fingers hovered over the typewriter keys, trembling with the ghost of confidence they once possessed. When he struck them, the machine resisted him like a stubborn animal. Metal clashed against metal, then fell into a dull and humiliating clunk. The sound echoed far too loudly in the empty room, amplifying his frustration. The words refused to come, trapped somewhere between regret and fear, while the page stared back at him in pristine and merciless white. Anger surged suddenly, sharp and uncontrollable. Silas reached for the nearest glass without thinking, the movement instinctive and almost violent in its speed. The glass left his hand and met the wall with brutal finality, shattering into fragments that scattered across the floor like the remains of an argument no one won. The crash rang through the villa, then faded, leaving behind a deeper and heavier silence that felt impossible to escape. Damn it. Quiet. It is finally quiet. Isn't this what you wanted, Silas? Why does this silence sound like a funeral now? The quiet answered him with nothing, and yet with everything. It pressed against his ears until it felt loud, roaring with all the things he had chosen not to say. This was the silence he had demanded, the solitude he had claimed was necessary for greatness. Now it felt like a verdict, final and unforgiving, as though the villa itself were holding its breath, waiting to see if he would finally break. The sudden knocking shattered the stillness with startling violence. It came fast and relentless, striking the door in a rhythm driven by urgency rather than politeness. Each knock echoed down the corridor, stirring memories of another moment and another arrival. The door, left unlocked as if he no longer cared to guard his isolation, was shoved open with decisive force. Footsteps rushed in, uneven and breathless, carrying the sharp sound of someone who had run without stopping. The air seemed to change with the intrusion, charged and electric. Rapid breathing filled the space, colliding with Silas's stunned stillness, as if two opposing worlds had slammed into each other inside the villa's fragile calm. Nora, did the car break down? Nora stood before him, her chest rising and falling as she fought for breath, her hair slightly disheveled and her eyes burning with a furious kind of clarity. In her hand was the manuscript, pages bent and gripped so tightly they threatened to tear. She looked less like someone who had come to visit and more like someone who had returned from battle, unwilling to accept defeat. Sir, the ending is wrong. The ending of this book is trash. Her words cut through him with surgical precision, leaving no room for polite denial. The manuscript trembled as she waved it, each movement fueled by outrage and something deeper, disappointment laced with care. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable, daring him to defend himself if he could. What? She closed the distance between them without hesitation, her steps sharp and purposeful. Every inch she advanced felt like a challenge, an unspoken demand that he look at what he had written and finally admit the truth. Her presence filled the room, crowding out the silence he had so carefully cultivated. The male lead sends the female lead away because he is a coward? What kind of third-rate romance novel garbage is this? Silas Vane, Pulitzer Prize winner, is this your level? For a moment, he could only stare at her, stunned by the ferocity of her honesty. Then something shifted. The rigid mask he wore cracked just enough for a smile to creep onto his lips, faint and almost amused, as though her anger had reached a part of him nothing else could. Then what do you think the ending should be? Nora answered not with restraint, but with action. She slapped the manuscript against his chest, the impact solid and undeniable, as if she were trying to force the truth directly into his heart. The pages rustled loudly, the sound of a story demanding to be finished properly. The ending should be that the old bastard realizes that without the bird, his ink dries up. He should kneel down and beg her to stay, or her hand shot forward, gripping his collar and yanking him down to her level. The movement was abrupt and intimate, leaving no space for pretense. Their faces were suddenly close enough for him to feel her breath, warm and uneven, carrying every unsaid emotion between them, or at least act like a man and admit he cannot live without her. Silas looked at her flushed face and the fire in her eyes that mirrored his own buried longing. In that instant, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The weight he had been carrying loosened, his defenses dissolving as his gaze softened completely, stripped of irony and fear. You really are a lunatic. Why did you come back? There is nothing here. She did not hesitate. There was no grand gesture and no dramatic pause. Her answer was simple, devastating in its sincerity, cutting through every excuse he had ever made. You are here. That is enough. The room seemed to inhale before it exhaled into chaos. Silas crossed the small distance between them with a sudden, decisive motion, lifting Nora as if gravity had briefly renegotiated its terms. The desk groaned softly under her weight, the old wood polished thin by years of restless revisions. Papers erupted into the air, pages fluttering like startled birds, each one carrying half-finished sentences, abandoned metaphors, and the ghosts of drafts that had nearly broken them. The typewriter rattled, its metal keys chiming faintly in protest, as the world narrowed to the heat of his arms and the certainty of this moment. Silas's breath was uneven when he spoke, the roughness in his voice born not from anger, but from restraint held too long. His possessiveness was not a snare, but a declaration, forged in fear of absence and the memory of her leaving. The desk lamp cast a warm, imperfect halo over them, illuminating dust motes that drifted like suspended time. Every sound beyond the room felt distant and muted, as if the door had sealed itself against everything except what was about to be said. "Since you came back, I have welded the lock shut. This time, even if you want to leave, you cannot. We are going to finish writing this book." Nora did not pull away. The question that rose to her lips carried the weight of all their unfinished chapters, of nights spent staring at blank pages and mornings regretting what had been written in haste. Her eyes searched his face, not for escape, but for method. How love could be translated into sentences that would last longer than breath. The scattered papers seemed to listen, edges curling as if eager to be chosen again. "How do we write it?" Silas smiled, not wide, not easy, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had finally accepted the scope of his own promise. He reached out and steadied the typewriter, fingers brushing cold metal, then let it go. The answer he carried was not clever. It was enduring. Outside, time continued its indifferent march, but inside the room, it slowed, thickened, and waited. We write it with a lifetime, starting with Chapter 1, Revisions. The typewriter was pushed aside with intention. Its legs scraped softly against the desk, conceding its place to something older and less precise. Silas leaned in, and the kiss that followed was unhurried and deep, a punctuation mark written in warmth rather than ink. As their breath mingled, a cello emerged beneath the moment, low, resonant, and human, its melody wrapping the room in a tender gravity that made even the shadows feel kind. The music did not demand attention, it carried it. Each drawn bow across the strings mirrored the slow certainty of their closeness, the promise that what mattered most would not be rushed. The scattered pages settled at last, some face down, some open, all of them patient. The desk lamp flickered once, then steadied, as if acknowledging that the story had found its ending by choosing a beginning. "The world is loud, Nora. But in your breath, I found what I have always craved, silence and peace. You are my final period." His words lingered in the air, not as an ending, but as a resolve. In that silence he named, Silas felt the long ache of striving finally loosen. The noise of ambition, of doubt, and of the need to prove something to unseen readers receded. What remained was the simple cadence of shared breathing and the knowledge that a life, like a book, is revised not by erasing mistakes, but by choosing to continue. Nora was not an end to him. She was the mark that made everything before it complete. One key on the typewriter was pressed deliberately and alone. The sound rang clear and final, bright as a bell and sure as a promise kept. It echoed once, then dissolved into the cello's last vibration. The room held still, pages at rest, ink drying in memory rather than on paper. Nothing more needed to be written. The story had found its truest form.